Here it is. We're going to smash the fash narrative. Here, in my attempt to elevate the discourse on this platform, I am going to quickly define fascism and its history upon inception, its ideals, and its goals. In this video, I'm also going to take a look at how two prominent Stevens on this platform use this word in a very disingenuous way to smear the other side. So, I got a question for you. Have you ever seen Steven Crowder and Destiny Steven in the same room at the same time? Could they be the same person? Their take on fascism is pretty much the same as at its root. You cherry pick the factors you like that you can turn into a cudgel to attack your political opposition and ignore the greater context. So I'm going to explore the two sides of this coin that is they are way more alike than either side will admit. If you watch my perception gap video, you probably saw this coming because I not only mentioned these two, but I also mentioned with the perception gap that you will find people that have a misconception of what the other side believe the exact same things about the other side, that they're both racist, that they're both corrupt, that they're both uneducated and evil. So I do have a bit more for Destiny on this topic, and when I start to get into the breakdowns, you'll see that I have a whole page of notes written for him and only 2 paragraphs for Crowder, and the reason for that is because Crowder is pretty upfront about his partisan leanings and how he views the world, so I don't necessarily hold him to the same standard as Destiny, where Destiny is more of a seeker of the truth. He'll battle people on both the left and the right in order to... And he'll even take right-wing stances at times when they are correct. So that's why I hold him to that higher standard and why I'm going to be a little bit harsher on him. He, in a sense, deserves it. Now, at the same time, I also tend to call Destiny out a little bit because I think I could kind of walk circles around him, at least on this particular subject, in a debate. And the reason why he's not answering me, in the words of the great scholar Little John, is... And that about sums it up. Is, he's a bitch. Fans of the channel, the few of you that I have so far, stay tuned. I'm about to do my 2024 GOP follow-up where I'm going to dive into all the Trump indictments and all the other candidates that are running for president or vice president or a position in the cabinet of the next person who wins, because not everybody is running for president is actually trying to win that position. So I'm going to throw a lot of speculation in there because we're so early in the primary process that the polls don't matter that much, but I will go over the polling data. After that, part 2 of my series, pushing back on the left and right-wing race-based crime narratives. My video debunking 52% despite 13% seems to be doing well. I haven't received any real pushback on the core argument so much. Nuance Bro, big YouTuber that I'm actually a big fan of, gave me some feedback on it. He was trying to fact check me on a couple things, and it turned out I was correct still, but I really appreciate him reaching out, giving me some tips on video making, and attempting at least to prove me wrong. It was fantastic, so a special thank you to him, and if you weren't already a fan, go over to Nuance Bro's channel. Give him a sub. He's about as good as it gets in terms of factual video making. So stand back and stand by. I'm going to dive in. So first we're going to have the Steven Crowder clip. And this clip is from somebody else's video. Now, Steven Crowder said a lot on this subject, so I figured I'd use this man's video because he already did all the work. Now, Steven Crowder is making the claim here that fascism is socialism, ignoring the nationalistic part, pretty much the exact opposite of what the left does, says fascism is nationalism and ignores the Marxist roots. So when the fascists took over Italy, for instance, they had Marxian roots, and their system did push for workers' rights, women's rights, taxation against capital. It's all in the Fascist Manifesto. But unlike the communist systems at the time, they didn't enforce mandatory co-ops or have the state become the enforcement mechanism behind equal distribution. They did privatization, which allowed markets to exist still. The topic is interesting because it requires capitalism because of the markets, or it requires a market-based system, but it's also extremely anti-capitalist at the time as well. To take a public sector good or service and move it to a private sector is something that is done under capitalism, but we don't usually give it to somebody who is a state loyalist or a friend of the government. We usually give it to somebody who earned the position based on merit. We usually just give money to businesses that worked their way up through the ranks and became bigger businesses because more people give them money. So the general privatization isn't bad. What they did in Italy and Germany was they took owners' private property away from them and gave it to state-friendly actors. They also did it with public sector goods and services as well. So if you don't have free enterprise, if merit isn't the basis of the ownership and earning of private property, you don't have capitalism. You have a planned economy, and that is antithetical to capitalism. Now, a right-winger could argue that fascist government is quite similar to different versions of market socialism, and I'm not going to dive down that rabbit hole, but there is a decent argument there. I'm going to get into it a little bit later, but it's I can make a whole video on that. So I outsourced the Crowder clip. Oh. Yeah, so this person is using like cliche, old school Marxist socialism, and he actually does prove his point. But I would not advise watching this guy's video if you're looking for a real good education on this. He does prove Crowder wrong, so if that's your bar, go ahead and watch it. But while I was watching this video, I wasn't even actively fact-checking it, since I wasn't using it for the purpose of education. And just listening to it, I heard multiple things he said that just were not true. The debunker we're going to go to now, that would be this gentleman here. 3 arrows. Right after the Crowder clip is done, he says something along the lines of liberal socialism is a contradiction, implying it doesn't exist and that Crowder's an idiot for even suggesting it. But we can go over to types of socialism and we will see liberal socialism as well as many other types of market socialism exist. So either that guy doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's using a very, very narrow definition of socialism that kind of outdated, but maybe relevant for what he's trying to do. Again, in his own little bubble, he did a good job at debunking Crowder. But let's pause the music here, and we'll go ahead and jump into the first clip.
Economic authoritarianism is still authoritarianism. I wrote about this.
Roasted.
That Hitler, what do we hear about Hitler? He was
super right-wing.
Right-wing. Nazi stands for National Socialist German Workers' Party. Okay? So put that in your back pocket. Now, let me get to something people will say. I know what you're going to say. National socialism, not democratic socialism like Bernie Sanders. There's a huge... One is fascism, right-wing. One is not. They're both socialism. Democratic socialism always becomes nationalistic socialism. By definition, it has to. Why? Okay. The United States is not a democracy. You throw around the term democratic as though it's noble. No. We're a constitutional representative republic. Why? That's important to know. It's important to know we're not a democracy. That's because democracy is mob rule. The reason the United States was framed as a constitutional representative republic is to make sure that the rights of the minority are still protected from the majority. Otherwise, the majority can just vote and screw the minority. You're more liberal. You should be on board with that. Democracy, by definition, would inherently be bad for minorities. So, am I saying Bernie Sanders is like Hitler? No, but the ideology is the ideology that lends itself toward authoritarianism and fascism because of an increased expansion of the state. Now, why is this so important, going back to representative government? Well, Hitler used the idea of democracy, mob rule, to infringe on the rights of the minority. How do we feel about the rich Jews, the rich lying Jews, 1%? Let's have a vote. Kill the Judens.
I'm sorry, everyone. Bear with me. It will be over in a second.
The majority, Germans, It's democratic and it's nationalistic. They believe Germany was for the true Germans, not for the Jews. Democracy, nationalism, either way. Mob rule, the nationalists win. That's the whole point.
Now,
All right, so here we can see the right-wing example of exactly what I was saying. Fascism isn't about the policies that fascists wanted. It's not about what they did when they were in power. It's about actions they took. And these actions, as I'm going to describe right now, exist in almost every form of government. So Crowder greatly oversimplifies fascism, uses it interchangeably with actions and stances like authoritarianism, and he makes the mob rule argument like a constitutional republic is somehow invalid from this. Tomorrow, if 75% of states woke up and decided they wanted to get rid of every amendment in the Bill of Rights, they could do it. They could do it tomorrow. We have the mechanisms in place to take away all the rights the people have in a similar fashion to what these governments did. Under our current system, minorities can still be oppressed. So to say that that was a unique feature of fascism is conceding that every government is fascist. Like, it just doesn't make sense. And it's a different subject, but it's the same exact tactic. Now, again, Crowder is outspoken right-winger who frames things from a right-wing perspective and doesn't pretend to be an arbiter of, well, he does pretend to be an arbiter of the truth, but he also says he's right-wing and he looks at it from that way. As I said, Destiny, on the other hand, is a little more nuanced than that. He doesn't think that left-wing is the only right way. He has a couple conservative stances, and I don't know. I hold him to a different standard. So we're going to move into his. I told you Crowder was quick. I just wanted to show you this. He's doing the exact same thing. We're going to move into Destiny's, and this is after Destiny's debate with Cenk-Uygur, and I loved this debate, the first half of it. There were some things I disagreed with. Destiny doesn't know anything about the Tulsa Massacre, for instance, and he has zero idea what fascism is, but the debate was very policy-oriented, and they started to dig into the surface of the details, and I think that's something great. We need to see more of that on YouTube. Actual policy debates where people dig into the details and debate the finer points instead of just framing a policy as overall bad or good. So I really enjoyed it. I didn't think it was boring at all, but during this debate, Destiny refers to Trump as the most fascist regime ever. So we're going to start at the end of the video when one of his fans asks him why he thinks Trump is a fascist.
Please explain to chat why you think Trump is a fascist. The biggest hallmark, the biggest two hallmarkers for me is that Trump wanted single person rule. Trump wanted to be able to rule with a pen. He wanted to be able to do everything on his own. Number one, he had no respect for political process. And then two, this kind of goes along with it. I don't think Trump has respect for rule of law. He wants to bend the rule of law to suit his particular needs. In my opinion, those two things, and like a disdain for liberal values, those things make you like essentially a fascist. He wasn't actually, because he couldn't. I think for whatever reason, the guardrails on U.S. democracy were, I guess, stronger than we all thought. But goddamn, did he try? Things like getting Pence to overturn the vote, things like talking about arresting political opponents, revoking citizenship from people that disrespected the flag, getting the Supreme Court to give him an okay to go and do border policy, trying to ban groups of people from this country for U.S. security reasons when it was just race-based. Calling Georgia to find the votes he needed to flip that election, undermining the integrity of our electoral process.
Now, he gives a lot of examples here, and calling Georgia to find the votes he needs, that is a crime, and that's being investigated right now, and as of today, no charges have been filed, so he's alleging Trump committed a crime, and the people looking into it haven't even said that yet. So I would say he's getting out ahead of his skis there. Having Mike Pence change the vote, I don't know he had him do anything, because Mike Pence said no. The day after January 6th, Trump said we lost the election, we're focusing on a peaceful transition of power, and did it. So his actions were exactly what he needed to do. Anyways, we're going to get into that. So now we see the very same thing from Destiny, and that Destiny's definition of fascism is picking out actions and features to fit the narrative. What other political movement is defined by its actions and not the actual beliefs of the philosophy behind it? The major points here that Destiny says and gives examples of is Trump is a fascist because he wants single person rule. So, how do you make that assessment? Was it his executive actions? Because in the first 6 months in office, I'm fairly certain Biden had more executive actions than Trump. And that scales up every presidential cycle with political polarization. I go into that in a different video, but when you have to use the pen to rule, it's because we currently have a dysfunctional government. So I could see a lot of the policy Trump would have benefited by getting done and wanted to do, but he couldn't because he didn't have single person rule, because he tried to do it the right way. So my favorite example is Trump offering 2.4 million DACA dreamers a path to citizenship for $20 billion to finish the wall. And the wall never got more than 30% done under his tenure, and most of it was replacing old wall. So Trump really wanted that wall done. That was his signature policy. And if he had that single person rule, he would have gotten more than 30% of it done, don't you think? I don't know if I can properly address Destiny's argument without hearing it a little bit more in depth, but the point here is that someone wanting single person rule is not a feature of fascism in particular, and it's also a feature of a monarchy. It's a feature of all sorts of different types of government. So you can't say that something that exists in multiple types of government is a feature of one specific type of government. A single party rule, you could describe several different left and right-wing authoritarian states to have that. A constitutional monarchy is one, a religious monarchy, communist authoritarian states had single person rule as well. I don't know. I could see like a religious based monarchy to be a far to the right of fascism and still have single person rule. Now the claim no respect for the rule of law, which basically means he ignores the laws he doesn't agree with. That's what mostly every American does. Every American, well, I think it's like 80% of Americans have admitted to at least smoking weed once. That's something that's been federally illegal for 100 years. If you smoke weed, you don't respect the rule of law. Simply put. So, are these people all fascists, or is this a stupid point that has nothing to do with political fascism? Also, fascism, how did this form of government get the reputation for not respecting the rule of law? Because I'm fairly certain that they were elected into power legitimately and changed their government in legitimate ways into a very bad course of action. But I don't see anything about them disrespecting the rule of law. I think that's just, you're saying he's a criminal, which, you know, Trump has quite a bit of history doing some pretty shitty things like not paying contractors. If you're calling him a criminal, I mean, you could definitely make that case pretty reasonably, but saying he's a fascist because he doesn't respect the rule of law just kind of makes you look stupid because you don't know what fascism is. So this seems to be the same low brain mush that Destiny constantly demonstrates when it comes to GOP politics, because he has to do more than skim the internet for 15 minutes to know policy details. Wow, shots fired in my notes. Damn. Wow. Sorry, Destiny. I guess my mindset writing this script was not a very big fan of you. In a previous video, I pointed out how he doesn't even know the basic GOP stances and policy prescriptions for all sorts of issues that he thinks are just cultural. So that I kind of want to dive into that. My Debunk Destiny video went into that a bit, as he basically doesn't even know basic right-wing policies. And like for schools, the school voucher thing, for abortion, the Republicans spent 50 years building a system to elect the right federal judges and to overturn abortion rulings, and it was extremely elaborate and took a lot of time and effort and money, and he doesn't even know this stuff exists. He just thinks that they're all culture warriors and doesn't understand that politics is downstream from culture. So once something moves into the political realm, it might have started in the cultural field, but once it's a political issue, it's no longer a cultural issue. The trans debate has moved into a political issue because we're making policy around it. We're making bathroom policy. The Biden administration was threatening to withhold money from schools that didn't adhere to his trans policies. Things like that. So if we're taking food out of kids' mouths based on trans policies in the form of legislation, this is no longer a cultural issue. This is a political issue. So stop pretending like talking about it is just cultural. This is political. So, Okay. Yeah, I went over all that in my little rant there. Cherry pick bot. Okay, so yeah, if I wanted to, I could take Destiny's rule of law logic and just I'm going to give you one example, but I could probably give you 100 if I really wanted to hammer down on this. So Biden had the eviction moratorium in place. The Supreme Court ruled on it. They said it was probably unconstitutional, but effectively said it's going to sunset in a couple of months, so we're not going to strike it. So after that ruling by the Supreme Court, Biden reinstituted the eviction moratorium that they declared unconstitutional, knowing it was unconstitutional, ignoring the orders of the courts, just to squeeze a few more months out of it because then they'd have to rule on it and declare it unconstitutional a second time. And that's a blatant disrespect for the rule of law. That would make, in this argument, Biden equally as fascist as Trump. And I can give you a bunch of other examples. That's just one. So I just don't think these are good metrics to determine what fascism is. One, because they have nothing to do with fascism, and two, because realistically, you could frame a lot of people as fascists. They have zero core fascist beliefs. So, and then he also brings up that Trump is anti-liberal, but I mean, like, everyone calls the other side anti-liberal. Liberalism is at the heart of both neocon and neoliberal policies. The two major factions that fall under left and right-wing tents are both liberal to the core. I mean, one side is trying to push back on First Amendment with hate speech. The other side is trying to push back on the right to privacy. And, like, there's pushback, but they don't want to get rid of these things. Saying somebody's illiberal, especially somebody that's from the pro-gun side, pro-Second Amendment side, is anti civil liberties, it just isn't a good argument. It's just cherry picking to smear. It's all smears. Everything Destiny says here about fascism is just him smearing Trump. So, and I'm not saying his points are bad, they're just not fascism. He definitely is right, Trump is a criminal. Okay, we have covered two pretty stupid takes from both sides. Now, let's go to this charming young man's history YouTube channel and take his conclusion clip out of it. And this video is longer than the video I'm going to be making here, and all he does is go over the philosophical roots of fascism and the economic policies of fascism. If you really want that full explanation, I really recommend this video because this guy is really trying to find the truth here, and he calls out both sides in a similar way to I do here. So I'll link it below, and if you want to spend an hour learning about this, this is a really great way to do it. This guy's fantastic. But never met the dude, don't know him. I just found him in the research and want to plug a really good YouTube channel. So I could say that I use this video mostly as a recap myself. I spent many long nights on the couch, stoned, watching World War II documentaries. I've read a few books about World War II. It's just I'm a little bit of a history buff with this stuff. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert or a historian, but I just like, documentaries and things like that. Old school documentaries, not nowadays where documentary is just a one-sided argument. So I do have a couple books on fascism that I've read in the past that I am kind of going to jump into, as well as the Fascist Manifesto. I've already jumped into that once, and I'm not really going to cite those things. I can give you the books if you need, but these things have been out for 30, 40, 50 years, so you can go look them up. I'm going to use this to plug other YouTubers because, we're a community. I'm joining your community. I'm going to plug you. Not some fucking book. Fuck that. And if anyone finds anything I say to be incorrect, always welcome the comments. I want to hear it. I could be completely wrong about things. I could be oversimplifying, glossing over. I am open to hear it. Leave it in the comments. I will read and appreciate it. So let's get to this young man's conclusion video where he says some things, and I'll stop it when I think it's pertinent. That was my chair. I almost fell over.
Okay, now we're finally at the question, what is fascism? To me, this entire video has been answering that question so far. It's been answering what fascism looks like in theory, and it's been giving glimpses into what it looks like in practice. But now we're looking for something shorter. We're looking for something that resembles a definition. The most popular approach I see tries to define fascism by going into the details of fascist movements. So they might talk about say a charismatic leader, or a democracy being in trouble, or maybe something about late-stage capitalism, things like that. And at the risk of... I
gave a little different examples, but Basically, I'm making the same argument.
Of being rude, to me, that's obviously the wrong approach. We don't define any of the other major isms that way. We don't define liberalism based on, say, details of liberal movements, or socialism by details of socialist movements. So to me, we should obviously define it based on its core idea and not the details of the movements. And for me, the gold standard here is Karl Marx's definition of communism in the Communist Manifesto, where he says, "The theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property." Which then makes me ask, is there an idea or a set of words where if you heard them, you would recognize them as distinctly fascist? Since the 20th century, those words cannot be anything other than fascism. Because if that's the case, then I think that's a good starting point. And in my opinion, those words do exist. And those are the words, blood and soil. If we accept that blood and soil is fascist, and cannot be anything other than fascist, then we can test out the idea that fascism is the ideology of blood and soil.
I really like that. I think that's perfect. I think that sums up that there are some left and right wing roots to it, and most people using the word nowadays are using it as a smear. So I'm going to cover some basic talking points about fascism that I have discovered from books and in my journeys over the years. Books, documentaries, and some of it's in this video too. Most of it actually that I'm going to cover was triggered by things this video inspired. It was a great refresher, and again, I cannot recommend Ryan Chapman here enough. He's fantastic. This is my third YouTube account, and I just subbed on my third one because fucking A, this guy's the best. Anywho, fascism was founded by Benito Mussolini, the former leader of his nation's Soviet movement. Or socialist movement, I'm sorry. His nation's socialist movement. He was a fan of a Marxist philosopher named George Sorel. Now, we can see George Sorel over in the types of fascism. He is cited here at 141, and George Sorel is said to be an important part in the labor movement of an anarchist branch of socialism called anarcho-syndical. You can read it. So yeah, this gentleman was a Marxist philosopher, and I'll get into him in a second, actually. Let me finish okay, so what Sorel believed, which was passed to Gentile, the father of fascism, the philosopher that was given that name, was that the collectivist movement that fascism and all other forms of Marxism was incepted around needs a defining myth. And that defining myth, and I'm not saying a myth like a fake story. It doesn't even have to be fake. It just has to be, I should have thought about this a little bit more before I made the video. Mythological is in like the mascot of your story. I can't think of a good word for it, but I'll think about that one a little bit. Sorry about that. But yeah, so he believed that there was a central core message, a myth in these movements, and it didn't have to be the utopian economic abolish private property message. You could switch that myth out with something else. So the fascists switched it out with nationalism. They took the socialist Marxian structure, and instead of making an economic movement, which was still a workers' movement in many ways, instead of that being the primary focus was nationalism instead. Now, Mussolini used things like crowd psychology as well as Hitler. And you often see, the actions of these gentlemen as definitions of fascism, but politicians in the United States use crowd psychology tactics on you every time they talk. So it's interesting to me that some of these actions keep getting pulled out and pooled together as a feature of fascism, when in reality, like, I can show you both Trump and Joe Biden doing crowd psychology tactics in their speeches. So, I mean, especially when using the same fear-mongering that the Nazis did about the Jews. We hear this in politics today. Almost every issue, there's at least one narrative our guns were our abortion rights. They're coming for our guns. They're coming for our uteruses. The climate is it's going to kill us in a decade. You need to act now. Our elections are being stolen. You need to get rid of mail-in ballots. Everything in politics at least has one message that's fear-mongering. Every subject in politics. And some of them, that's the only message, is fear-mongering. It's really very prominent in today's society, and that's essentially what Hitler did about the Jews. He said that they were flea-ridden and disease-ridden and subhuman, and he's made you fear them being around you. And it was all bullshit, same way most of this fear-mongering is in the United States. That's why I see every election being called the most important election of our time, and every right-winger is the most fascist, and the last guy wasn't so bad. Now, George Bush wasn't so bad, but at the time in office, he was a Nazi, and Mitt Romney wanted to put black people back in chains, and now he's like the hero Republican. So fear-mongering is a natural part of politics and group psychology as well. So this is another common thing people say about fascists, and it's just an action that disingenuous people do. That's all it is. Mussolini thought the government of collectivists was the next step for the 20th century, and he did not have a good look of Western capitalism, liberalism, conservatism, any of these American views. He thought that liberals' individualism was incorrect, old-fashioned, and was going to get left behind. He thought that they were he thought that they were stupid, essentially. He thought liberals were opinionated stupid. He thought conservatives were aristocratic elite. And he thought that they thought they were better than you, which, most people are aristocratic and elite. That's the definition of an elitist from the negative perspective, is they look down on everyone else. He thought that the meritocracy, and you'll hear this out of socialist movements today, he thought that the meritocracy was a corrupt system because the people that had the money already could afford better teachers for their kids and afford better situations for their family, so they were constantly always going to be at the top of the meritocracy. It was a corrupt system, not because it was corrupt at its core, it's because not everyone started from the same place. Well, he called these types of government dead energy, especially individualism, and he spoke of being left behind while he praised Marx and Sorel for their collectivist movements, even though he did take exception to some parts of Marxism. He claims himself in his own writing that the ideals behind fascism are rooted in Marxism somewhat. Not fully, not completely, but they are rooted in Marxism, especially Sorelian Marxism. He admits it, Benito Mussolini himself. This isn't to deny that it's nationalistic, that there's not a lot of right-wing features, and the way I kind of sum it up is he tried to create a hybrid government between market-based capitalism and collectivist-based Marxism. And his version of this hybrid was fascism. And it was also greatly nationalistic too, but I'm not trying to say fascism is left-wing or at all, really, at the end of the day, because it does fall to the right of center. Now, another YouTuber, Wendigoon, he's a bigger YouTuber. He doesn't need the props, but he did a 5-hour video going through the entire political compass and doing every single political movement, where it's placed on that political compass, and explaining it briefly. And fascism is slightly to the right of center. If you're calling somebody a fascist, you're saying that they're not that far right wing. You're saying that they're kind of a centrist authoritarian. If you want to call somebody far right, there's better ways to do it. That's my opinion. Fascists thought that Marxists were too dogmatic to their economic ideals, and thought Marxian economic models would not work due to utopian desires of sharing that were not practical. And that's essentially it. That's the same argument that capitalists make about Marxian economic structures, and that's kind of why the fascists abandoned it and allowed markets to exist. They were a market form of socialism. Their economic ideals instead married the workers' movement demands with a rigid structure for planned markets. As I said earlier, it does have a bunch more similarities with market socialism than the ideals of laissez-faire capitalism or strict USSR communism. So, someone who agrees with the close ties was Stalin, actually. after World War II, the Nazis and the fascists, where there were still a lot of them out there. They were kind of lost, the ones that weren't tried in Nuremberg and whatnot. So Stalin actually restarted a popular fascist print. Well, I don't remember the name of the newspaper offhand, but he was using that to get disgruntled and now homeless political fascists to join his movement. So that was a thing. Another common argument I see is people try to deny the Marxist roots of Nazism. This is more of a left-winger thing, because Hitler himself didn't personally believe in Marx. He wasn't a big fan of Marx, and he didn't really believe in a lot of the Marxian parts of his movement. And I don't think Himmler was a huge fan of either, but Joseph Goebbels was. Joseph Goebbels was a devout follower. Benito Mussolini was. He was a lifelong socialist. He truly believed in these things. A lot of the fascists did. And just because Hitler did it, and Goebbels, I'm going to get into Goebbels for my right-wing rebuff, but Hitler co-opted them by using the language that they wanted to hear. So maybe if Hitler wasn't a fascist, okay, or Hitler wasn't a Marxist, a fan of Marx, okay, but he still used that rhetoric to get people to his side. Now, Hitler was an Austrian Jew with brown hair. So if you're going to tell me his nationalism, his German, Aryan, Christian nationalism was sincere, but his Marxism wasn't, yeah, you got to explain that a little bit, because he didn't fit the mold of the Aryan, German, Christian. So how could he be a sincere nationalist? Anyways, going back to Himmler, Himmler was an occultist. He didn't believe in religion. He was kind of an anti-religion guy. He did some really weird things and allowed scientists to do some pretty brutal things, and Stephen Crowder uses that to downplay the Nazis' ties to Christianity, despite the fact that most of the Nazis were very devout Christians, and the Vatican turned a blind eye to the Holocaust while it was happening, and after it was discovered the whole world knew the Holocaust was going on, the Vatican helped Nazis escape to South America. So there was a bit of a tie there between the Christian church, at least the Catholic wing of the Christian church, and the Nazis. The Nazis were a little bit more pro-Christian, and Christianity was the predominant religion in Germany at the time, so that was part of their national identity. You can't just cherry pick some features of a movement and use it to exclude or change the narrative of the full movement. That's called obfuscation. You're muddying the waters. This is something we see all the time in politics, but especially with smearing on the internet. You take one person's view and pretend like it represents the entire group to make a point. This is, nitpicking. That's what that's called. History is complicated, and people would be shocked to know that for years, one of Hitler's closest allies and greatest supporters was an openly gay man who was later killed by Hitler, but that's a little bit more complicated of a situation. So now I'm going to jump into another YouTuber, James Lindsay. I keep hitting on random people who do politics here on YouTube, but James Lindsay is the next one. He's an angry man. He is a very angry man, and it really shows in his videos, in his podcast, but also someone who is probably more intelligent than almost anybody on YouTube, if not the planet. He's got a crazy degree in mathematics and whatnot, so what he summarizes and calls post-neo-Marxism is kind of similar to the Sorelian myth exchange. What he's saying with post-neo-Marxism is these post-neo-Marxists that exist in the West today are taking the framework of Marxism and is pulling out the economic Marxist model and replacing race in there or gender or other things, and using the same rhetoric that was used to buy communists for 150 years to advance these other movements, but in the same communist model. So it's not economic communism, it's cultural communism, cultural Marxism, I think he also used. And that's a very brief summary of it. He has just like 2.5 hour episodes on his podcast that are crazy long. I've probably listened to this guy for weeks of my life while I'm driving for work and such. So, also, just throwing this out there, if you have ever tried to read communist or any other philosophy theory, most of these people are terrible writers, and it's best to find somebody you trust, and I'm not saying that's James Lindsay, he's very one-sided, but find somebody you trust because they seem like an honest person and try to give honest takes, and have them read the work and break it down for you. Reading certain philosophers is like a whole task in itself. These people are terrible writers most of the time. Yeah, I find somebody you trust and have them break it down for you, because you can paraphrase most philosophical arguments in half an hour, and otherwise you struggle for a week trying to read this poorly written book. I saves a lot of time doing that. Also, I recommend the app Blinkist. It does the same thing with nonfiction books. Somebody will read a nonfiction book and give you like the talking points, the argument being made in the book. Blinkist, I love it. It's a way to just pump information into your brain. So now I want to end this. I think I did a pretty solid job above, so I want to end this on a hypothetical question. And I'm going to do video series with these fun hypothetical questions, and I'll probably make this one of them. You're here already, and I've already explained all this. The mood is set, the candles are lit. So why don't I just go ahead and ask it? So the hypothetical question is, if Hitler went to Germany, ran for office in the 30s and lost, and went back to Austria in shame, but didn't give up and advanced the same message in Austria, that's going to be what's setting the stage. So now the nation he would be leading would not actually be an Aryan Christian German cultural nation. He would be advocating for a different nation to import people that are Aryan so they could breed with them, to update their culture and their religion to the Christian German culture and religion. And my question is, if he took his exact platform, also with the awful things he did to the Jewish people and gypsies and etc., if he took all that, but he did it out of Austria and was trying to move Austria to be an Aryan Christian nation with German values, would he technically have been a progressive and still be able to do all the awful things he did to the Jews and whatnot? But since he's bringing this movement to a different nation, he's advancing this other nation forward with the exact same ideals, would he technically be a progressive? And I'd be interested to hear what you think about that, if I'm oversimplifying it, and I kind of am. I kind of hope you just look past the oversimplification to kind of play along with my fun question here. Maybe I'll throw hypothetical questions like these that I think of while I'm on the toilet at you, and see at the end of all videos and see what you think, because I really think this is a fun exercise in thought. If Hitler were bringing German Christian Aryan nationalism to Austria, a place that was none of these things, would he be a progressive with the exact same policies he pushed for in Germany? So I think that's interesting. Anyways, thanks for making it this far, watching, like, sub, do all that fun stuff. And Destiny, if you are watching this and made it this far, you a bitch, and I would break you in half in a debate. I think you're probably a nice guy.